Okay, hello and welcome to our week 8. This week we are really looking at one more topic, and that topic is going to be our articulations. And I think that articulations are kind of a nice way for us to move from the skeleton and skeletal system to muscles and muscular system. Because as you will notice, we've spent all this time so far in the past few couple of weeks talking about the bones that make your body. And one of the things that we saw that the skeletal system did was participate in the movements of our body. And how skeletal system participates in the movements is that whenever we see muscles, and we'll talk about muscles in the coming weeks, muscles typically run over parts where the two bones come together and they form an articulation at this junction point. So really we needed to first know the bones, and we will in the coming weeks get to know the muscles that run over these articulations. So today our focus is focusing on those articulations, on the joints of the body. Before we jump onto that and go into more detail, I do really quickly want to kind of set up a plan for what we're doing today. I would normally spend a little bit time on checking in. I think that in the interest of time today, I'm going to keep it very brief. It works a little better if we have more people in person. I also want to mention quickly about the midterm feedback that I'm requesting you to help me out with this week. We'll also have a look of the homework for this week, and bulk of the time will be spent on reviewing the chapter 9 content. You'll notice that chapter 9 is a little lighter than some of the other chapters that we've covered so far. So hopefully this week will give you a chance to have a bit of a breather. If we do have time, we might quickly look at a little bit of the homework for chapter 9. We'll kind of assess that as we get through the material and see where we're standing at that time. And as always, I want to make sure that we have time for any questions that anyone might have. So again, I just want to emphasize that my role on this class is to help you to accomplish whatever you want to accomplish. So I really am here on your side. I'm not trying to catch you out. I'm not trying to come up with curveball questions that would trick you or not make you perform well. My success is when you succeed. And for that reason, I'm always open for doing changes. I'm always open for extending due dates, all that kind of stuff, all the good stuff that's needed. So on that note, I think it's a very appropriate for us to talk a little bit about the midterm feedback. I know I had the midterm feedback originally posted for another week. I moved it back a little bit because I wanted to make sure that you have time to take your first exam. You have time to actually get a flavor of all kinds of things that we do in this class. But what I'm asking you to do as one of the homework activities for this week is to complete a little survey. And this is going to be an anonymous survey. It gives me an idea that how are we doing in this class. Obviously, I sometimes receive messages from you, but I don't always receive a message from everyone. And I want to make sure that everyone in this class has a chance to have their voice heard. So for that very reason, I collect this feedback also in a written format. This written format feedback is done through a Google Forms. You will find a link to it on a learning module labeled as midterm feedback, and it's actually located and under this week's learning module. So under the week 8 learning module, you will see a learning module that's labeled as midterm feedback. And I will jump onto that midterm feedback survey just to show it to you on your Canvas course in just a second. But I do want to emphasize that once you've completed the midterm feedback and you get to the very last page of that survey, it's actually going to give you a confirmation sheet or confirmation page where it says that thank you for submitting the survey, your answers have been submitted. This is the page that I'm asking you to take a screenshot. So most of you will have computers or phones or Padlets that allow you to capture the screen that's being viewed on the monitor at that time. Grab that picture, or if you're not able to do it with your computer, one of the simple things that you can do, you can simply take your mobile phone and literally take a picture of the screen that you're working on. It doesn't have to be a high quality, high resolution. I'm just looking for some kind of a confirmation that you submitted that survey. Then once you've submitted that survey, first of all, I'm going to be very, very grateful for you for doing so. Then you go back to this midterm feedback learning module, and you'll notice that underneath the link for the actual survey, there is an assignment. And by clicking onto this assignment, you can actually upload that screenshot that you just made. And by uploading that, I will know to award you the points for completion of this activity. This is a way for us to maintain the anonymity, that I don't really know who's answered what and whose answers are what, but at the same time make sure that if you complete the survey, you also get the points for it. And these points count towards your final grade. A final thing that I want to mention, that I sometimes realize that things happen. Some of you might have already submitted the midterm survey. If for some reason you fail to capture that final screen that confirms that you submitted that survey, it doesn't mean that all hope is lost. What you can do instead is that there's a little textbooks on that screen as well, or on that assignment as well. And you can literally type in the date and the time when you completed the survey. And that way I can cross-check that a survey was submitted on that day, roughly at that time, and I will still be able to award you the points. But it's obviously easier if you do that screenshot. So what I'm gonna do now, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, and instead I'm gonna jump to our Canvas course. And I'm gonna show you what the survey looks like. So let me share my screen. And I actually jumped around a little bit, and I made my Canvas course look the exact same as it would look for you on your end. So there's a little bit of differences depending on teacher view and student view, but we've got it up now. And if you scroll all the way down to week 8, which is the week that we're working on now, you'll see that we've got our familiar learning material on this Canvas course. And after the week 8, there's that midterm survey learning module. I mentioned that you can just simply click on to the midterm survey, and it will take you to this Google form that I'm asking you to complete. And as you're completing it, there's a few pages. It's not a super long survey, but it asks you to provide feedback. For example, how much you're enjoying of the course. It's the questions where we have red asterisks. Those are required, but then I also have options for you to give further feedback if you want. For example, I'm asking, what are the things that are working well? So you can write whatever you think is going well. What should we change, for example? And again, I'm just putting an example there. I'm not actually going to submit this version of the form because I shouldn't be giving feedback to myself. But in order to move to the next page, you have to always answer to the compulsory questions. And only the ones that are with the red asterisks are compulsory. Obviously, I appreciate if you give me more feedback. That helps me out as well. I'm also asking about the different kinds of assignments that we're completing. So how do you feel about the assignments assignments that we're completing, are they not useful or are they useful? And why do you feel that way? I really try to offer you a variety of assignments, but hearing your feedback allows me to change this course, not just from one semester to another, but also if there's something really strikingly obvious, I'm open to make those changes during the semester. One of the challenges I think we sometimes face is that we get feedback, but we get it after the semester has ended. And I want to make sure that I make those changes so that they still impact this particular class that's providing that feedback. So that's one of the reasons why I'm asking. This semester, one of the new things that I have been trying out are those simulations. And I know that we haven't done too many of those simulations, but early on the semester, we did a simulation about how we prepare a histological slide. So these are really kind of giving you almost a hands-on experience of things that we would do in in-person classes. But since we're not able to obviously do microscopy, do staining of slides in this virtual setting, they're the next best version of that. It gives you an idea what would happen in a hands-on activity. So I'm wanting to hear about your experience. How are you enjoying these simulations? Again, based on this feedback, I will choose whether to include them in the future semester's courses, but also whether to keep including them to this semester's class that we're taking together. So it's really, really useful for me to hear your thoughts of those. And again, I'm simply asking you to complete the required questions where you see that red asterisk. But if you provide me more information, it's always more useful. I also sometimes struggle when I get feedback in terms of number, but I don't know what led students feeling that way. So it's super useful if you can provide that feedback. And then I have a final couple of questions. Are you enjoying this course? And then if you want to share anything else with me or anything that's there. And then if you were to click submit, it would submit the survey and you would get that confirmation screen. Obviously, I'm not going to submit feedback for myself. That would be a little bit of unethical. So I'm just going to clear the form. But now you've seen that it's not a really long activity, but it's a really important activity. The reason why we're completing this midterm survey is multifolded, like I mentioned. First of all, I want to make sure that everyone has a chance to give me feedback, even if you're not actively messaging to me throughout the semester. I also want to make sure that you can give that feedback in a way that you feel safe, that it's not going to trace back to you. It's not going to be that, oh, this person said this person said that. It is an anonymous form. I also want to collect this feedback at this point, halfway through the semester, rather than waiting to the end of the semester, so that based on this feedback, I can actually do changes. Some of the changes, to give you an idea what I've done in the past, I have had students, even in online classes, who have been very, very curious that they would love to visit the campus once. So I organized last semester a trip for my students to come and see our mortuary science program. So where they do embalming of the human bodies and so on. So if I get feedback about something that you're missing, something that you're really wanting to experience, whether it's seeing catheters, whether it's getting to see other career paths than becoming a nurse. Our college offers multiple choices, and I know most of you are working towards nursing degree, but sometimes our plans change halfway through. So what I hear from you is what I will focus my energy on in terms of offering you other options of experiencing things beyond and above this class as well, but as well doing changes to this class based on what the class needs are. So that's our feedback survey that I said that I'm asking you to complete. Once you've completed the survey, like I said, you will find that you will be able to upload that picture of that survey that you completed here through the upload file. So I'm sure that I can make sure that you get those points for completion of this activity. If for some reason you missed out, you didn't have a chance of capturing that screen, another thing that you could do, you could just simply type in the date and the time when you completed the survey. So I can go back and make sure that you're getting the points for completion. Once you submit it, upload the file or type in the date and time. And once you submit it, I'll just add a file to be able to submit. You might need to add a file even if it just didn't capture a screen. Just upload any file at all, and then you will get a confirmation that you've submitted the activity, and you will get those points towards your final grade. Another aspect, and let me just jump from this screen back to our PowerPoint. Reason why I'm asking you to complete the midterm feedback is that it's actually part of the way how I get evaluated as your instructor. So it goes to my supervisors. For example, it can play role to what classes I teach in the future. So if you're having a really good experience and you would like to take classes with me in the future, that might be a nice thing to share. But also, if it's not really working out for you, that also goes to my supervisors, and it can have a very broad carrying impact. So I ask you to be honest, but I also ask you to be mindful, like I said, that all the feedback does go to the academic leadership, especially on my division and at the college at large. So I really do want the honest feedback, but I ask you to be mindful how you're phrasing it. So we're going to be a little bit more professional in the completion of the midterm feedback. So I think that that's all I have to say about the midterm feedback. Moving onwards, like I said, this is one of the assignments that I have for you for this week. Other assignments that I have for you this week include a quiz and practice anatomy assignment, both completed on the McGraw-Hill's Connect platform. You're very familiar with those. You've completed those before, so I don't think that there's anything highly new or shocking about those. There is, however, also a food for thought assignment. So we've done at least one of these before. These were those little mini essays, if you wish, about a paragraph in length, where you get to look in more detail about a particular topic on this course, such as on this week's assignment. I'm asking you to look into what does it mean to be double jointed. And then you write a short paragraph about that, and you get points for completion of that activity. I do want to show you what I'm looking for when I complete when you complete the food for thought assignment. So at the very end of this video, when we have that section where we look at the homework assignments, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about that, because you have already taken this assignment, but I do think that I have few further pointers that some of you might have benefited from if you had that idea of how to tackle the food for thought. So it's kind of a chance for me to reflect as well, how to do better as your instructor. I think that I can do better by providing you a little bit more of guidance on how to score the maximum points on this assignment. So with having said all that, I think that we're ready to review this week's material. And again, remember that you have full lecture videos that go into more detail in your Canvas course, but I want to give you kind of a nutshell version of the key points of what we're seeing on this week's material. So this week we're talking about articulations. I avoid using the other word for them. Sometimes YouTube algorithms and other things flag it up thinking that it's related to drugs. I'm not talking about drugs. I'm talking about articulations of your body. And what I'm talking about when I'm talking about articulations, I'm talking about sites where two bones come together. Really, the function of articulations is kind of two-folded. We briefly discussed how articulations are needed for us to generate movements. So most muscles run over at least one articulation, and as the muscle tightens and relaxes, it causes a change in that joint's angle, and it causes us to have movement happening. Another thing that joints do is really holding the body, holding the skeleton, the different bones that make up the skeleton. It's holding all of those together. And we can really classify different joints in a few different ways. We can classify them based on structure and based on their function. And we're going to start by looking at the structural classification. So the first example of structural classification that we're seeing is that we can discuss, for example, joints being either fibrous, cartilaginous, or synovial. So fibrous joints are joints that don't really move. They are made of fibrous connective tissue that connects the bones that are in very close contact. And I think a good example of that are, for example, the sutures of the skull. So you see that the sutures of the skull are these really kind of rigid interlocking junctions between the two bones that form a suture within the skull. And we saw some of those last week, or I believe when we talked about the skeleton and we talked about the skeleton of the skull. So you saw that these sutures actually form a very, very strong, very kind of a close contact that really doesn't move a lot. An exception of that is during the very early life at the time of birth. There are some differences to this. What I'm talking about when I'm talking about syndesmosis is really bands of tissue that connect two bones together. I think a good example would be, for example, the connection between tibia and fibula, or, for example, the interosseous membrane between the two bones, humerus and ulna, for example. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about syndesmosis. Gomphases are really kind of a peg in a socket kind of joints. I think a teeth would be a good example. The roots of the teeth go into the jawbone. So really that peg in a socket appearance on those that we're seeing. Talking about cartilaginous joints, this is where two bones come together. There's really no joint cavity, and these are really immobile or just slightly moving joints. Some examples of those would be, for example, our growth plates. I think that that's a really good example. We saw that at the end of long bones, we had that region where the new bone was being made and the joint grew in that sense. Another example that I can think of cartilaginous joints would be, for example, our pubic symphysis, the part where the two bones on two sides that make up the pubic symphysis come together. And normally this is held together, but we saw the exception that during childbirth, right before childbirth, that joint actually loosens up and opens so that the baby can come out through there. We would see another example of cartilaginous joints also with the costal cartilage, the cartilage that connects the ribs actually to the sternum. At the chest. So again, a very immobile or just slightly moving type of a joint. The final example is really probably my favorite example of structural classification of joints, and that's going to be our synovial joint. This is probably the more complex and also more important joint type. Synovial joints are free moving joints, and they're the most complex joints that we see when we're talking about the joints. And in order to talk about synovial joints a little bit, what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to try to sketch out a synovial joint with you. So let's have a look if we can do that together. And in order to set that up, what I'm going to do, so I'm sorry, I muted us so that the large sounds of moving the camera wouldn't cause too much distress for anyone. But what I'm really going to try to do here, I'm going to try to sketch out the synovial joint with you. And I think that the purpose of that is to make sure that we kind of have an idea of some of the important parts of the synovial joint. Sometimes I think that I'm still figuring out a best way to do this, so we'll give it a go this way around, and based on your feedback, maybe sketching out more structures is useful, maybe it's not. Let's see how it works. So let me just get the camera running. And at this point, you should be able to see a little bit of my desk space where I work. And I'm gonna sketch a synovial joint with you. And obviously it's an upside down. I'm gonna keep turning it around so you have a chance to see it. But I think that this would be a worthwhile activity for us to gain idea of some of the different parts of the synovial joints. And I believe that I do also have a lecture video on your Canvas course where I do go through the same process. It's a little bit more edited one. So this is just a kind of a summary of what we're seeing. And like I said, synovial joints that we're talking about now are the free moving joints. They actually have a far greater amount of movement than what we saw in our previous examples of our fibrous and cartilage joints. So these contain a great amount of movement. Um, these are also very complex joints, so there's a lot going on in terms of the anatomy, so we'll get to see a lot in there. I'm wondering, let's sketch a synovial joint. I'll also upload this diagram at the very end on your Canvas course, but like we discussed earlier on, joints are typically characterized by two bones coming together. They're these sides. So let's draw two bones here and see what we can learn about them. And just to make myself a little bit more space, I'm probably going to label structures on another sheet and then draw the drawing on another sheet. So let's start with our joint cavity that we have in a synovial joint. So there is gonna be a cavity around this joint. This is sometimes also called as synovial cavity. And this is really the structure that forms the actual space of what we're seeing in this particular joint type. So let's add that to our list of structures here. And I'm going to use colors since that's a way that I best learn. But obviously, you do you, you do what helps you to learn. But I really benefit as a learner from using color coding. So I'm going to try to label these structures with a little bit of using that approach of highlighting those different structures that we're doing with different coloring of them. So this was our joint cavity, this synovial cavity that forms the actual space of the synovial joint. So we'll see that there's a lot going on in this space for us. Picking up from there, I think that another thing that's going to be really important for us to add to this diagram is going to be our articular cartilage. And articular cartilage is found typically at the ends of the two bones that articulate, not always, but typically in most synovial joints. So we're going to add that as well to this diagram of ours. Typically, articular cartilage is going to be hyaline cartilage. So let's have a look of that. Like I said, it covers the ends of the bones. There's few different purposes for that. So we're avoiding that bone to bone grinding, kind of protecting the actual bone by having this. And these articular cartilages often slide much more easily past each other than what we would see in case of the bone to bone contact. And next thing that I want to add to our diagram is going to be the actual joint capsule. So we're going to add that as well. And the joint capsule is really the actual layer around this joint that we're seeing. So let's add that to our diagram as well. Again, I'm using a little bit of color coding just to make it easier to follow along what's happening here. One thing that we will actually end up seeing with the joint capsule is that joint capsules are typically made of actual two layers that are present at these sites. So you will find a fibrous layer that's more external, and then a more inner synovial membrane layer. So that's one thing that we'll sometimes see when we're looking at these joint capsules, that there's a little bit of two layers present, if you think of it that way. So let's add this joint capsule, like I said, to our illustration of a typical synovial joint. And there's going to be a few more structures that I'll be adding. Some of them I will be actually adding to this joint capsule space. So you'll see that I'm being a little bit of strategic of not coloring it completely blocked. so that the other structures that I'm adding can still show up on this space. They're located within the joints capsule. So I want to make sure that we can include them as well. But joint capsule covers all of this space that we're seeing on this figure. So that was our joint capsule. Like I said, there were two layers to it. We had the fibrous layer, which was more external layer, and then we had our synovial membrane. Which was more inner. Let's keep going on and let's add to this diagram that we have the actual fluid inside the synovial joint. So this is going to be our synovial fluid. And it's going to be found here within the cavity. So just to make it stand out a little bit more, I'm adding some dots that we're seeing there. We can also add a color just to make it a little easier for it to stand out. I'm not going to color it super dark again because there are few minor things that I want to add also into this space, but we're seeing that the synovial fluid fills the synovial joints inside part within this capsule that was boundaries marked by structures that we saw earlier on. So that's our synovial fluid within the capsule that we're seeing. With the synovial fluid, really, if we're thinking of the purpose why we have this synovial fluid, the actual fluid inside this synovial joint, it has kind of a two-folded purpose. First of all, it lubricates the structure so that these bone ends can slide easily past each other. Another thing that we're seeing is that there's not actually blood supply within these innermost structures of the synovial joint always, so it provides nourishment so that the nourishment can spread to all of these living tissues that are not always getting direct blood supply. So we can ensure that that happens as well. I do want to add another structure here, and that's going to be our ligaments. And we'll end up seeing that ligaments are found in various parts of this structure to kind of reinforce the structure itself. So we can see them within the capsule, we can see them outside the capsule, and we can see them also in the actual capsule wall itself as well. So there's many places where we see these ligaments present. So I think that it would be good for us to add those to our diagram as well. So let's see if we can color them nicely here to just make it a little easier for us to see them. So here we have our couple of ligaments that have been labeled there. There is going to be also a bunch of other things that we will end up seeing. This is kind of a collection of different things. We're going to see, for example, nerves. We're going to see also blood vessels. And these really kind of supply and nourish the joint through the blood vessels, providing nutrients and gases, removing wastes, and so on. So there's a lot of purposes for these blood vessels that we might see uh, on here as well. So let's add a blood vessel as well to our diagram. So yeah, like you remember, all living tissues required a constant supply of oxygen and nutrients, especially sources for energy. So we're making sure that that also exists in a synovial joint. Another thing that we're seeing, and I kind of touched upon this very briefly, but I didn't expand on that more. We're seeing also nerves present on the synovial joints. And the purpose why we're seeing this is really for us to be able to sense the possession, uh, any pain that might be present, and also kind of have an idea of the stretch that's found within this side. So there's gonna be also nerves present in synovial joints. So I'm adding one nerve there. Obviously, there would be others, there would be on multiple locations. But this is just kind of a schematic diagram to highlight some of the most important structures that we will see. So I think that that's a rather nice one there to illustrate that point that we're gonna see. I'm thinking, what else could we see? Well, sometimes we do see also within the joint capsule itself, we sometimes see these fat pads embedded in there. You can think of them a little bit like this cushioning that's found. It kind of gives us a way to ensure that we have a little bit of that cushioning also present within this capsule itself. So we tend to find those as well within the synovial joints. So I think that that's a good one to include. Another thing that we do see, and I think is a good one to add, is going to be our articular discs. And this one is going to be kind of a cross-sectional view of one, so it doesn't show the full of it, but in between these bone ends, we can have in certain joints, certain synovial joints, actually these discs that kind of also provide us this improved fit between structures and kind of help to stabilize this synovial joint and kind of reduce also the wear and tear where you would have otherwise either the bone ends or these articular cartilages coming together. So these articular discs, which we're only seeing a cross section here, play a role sometimes in synovial joints between these structures. I'm thinking what else to add, and I can only think of one more thing that we've not really discussed about, and I'm just looking for a good color to illustrate that. that would help us to highlight it. And I think we haven't used that color. So let's add also a bursay into this diagram. And these are really bags of synovial fluid that we can sometimes find also within the joint capsule itself, kind of helping there, reducing friction on these sides. So I think that that's gonna be a good one for us to add there as well. I think we've seen a bunch of structures at this point as it comes to the synovial joint. So I'm gonna leave it to that at this time. I think that that gives us a good idea of some of the most important things that we saw. Like I said, I will be uploading this diagram on your Canvas course a little later on. So if you wish to follow that along with our presentation, that's available for you there. And then again, give me just a second. I'm gonna readjust my camera so I can actually see you as I'm talking to you. So give me just a second. Diagram on your Canvas course a little later on. So if you wish to follow that along with our presentation, that's available for you there. And then again, give me just a second. I'm gonna readjust my camera so I can actually see you as I'm talking to you. So give me just a second. So now I think that we're nicely back. I really don't want to you to hear the horrible loud voices that happen when I move the camera around. So that was our sketch of a synovial joint. Like I said, I will be sure to post it available for you on the canvas as well. But I think that it's a rather nice way for you to gain an idea, an appreciation of the important things that we have present in this joint type. And let me jump back to our presentation. So now that we've discussed our synovial joint, I think that we can also mention the fact that we can classify joints based on their function, whether they are fully immovable, slightly movable, or totally freely movable. So that's another way how we sometimes approach this classification of the joints. However, what I do want to focus mostly for the remaining few moments that we're going to spend on this chapter content is actually by having a look of another way of classifying joints based on the movement when it comes to different categories. So we can talk about, for example, just gliding plane joints, where really what we're seeing is two structures just gliding past each other. We can also have hinge joints. These work almost like door hinge, if you wish to think of it that way. And again, we see these in many, many different parts of the body. When we're talking about pivot joints, I think that they're good ones. What we're seeing there is that one end holds still and then rotates. So that's an example as well. Condylar joints are kind of these oval sockets, but not quite the ball and socket fit, but we see these as well in our body. We can have saddle joints. Saddle joints are really where they fit well, and sits nicely together, but it's not unlimited range of movement that we're getting on this saddle. It's kind of limited on certain axes. And final one, I think that the most of us think of is our ball and socket joint, where we're really getting a great fit, but also a really large range of movement. And if you're interested in this classification, your textbook provides a great amount of information for you to refer in more detail if that's something that you're interested about. Um, I think that I was thinking that maybe I should have expanded a little bit more on these functional movement. So I'll just root back to here. I think that an example of the immovable joints really would be bones on your skull, for example. Slightly movable ones, I think, are a good example, are your ribs, facilitating the movement. Totally freely movable, for example, your shoulder joint, your hip joint, where we see this large range of movement. I think I'm gonna wrap it up here in terms of review of the chapter material, but I do want to spend a little bit of time today still with you by talking about the homework that we have for this week. And let me again switch to what screen I'm sharing. Now you should be seeing the same screen where you operate normally on our Canvas modules. And let's go to this week's module, which was the module for week 8, the joints. And I'm going to start by discussing about the homework activities with this food for thought activity that we have for being double jointed. As before, I know you've completed these before, but remember, this is a little bit of more of an application based, and it might require you to do a little bit more research on your own to the topic. And in order to help you to get started, I have actually provided you within the lecture material some starting references, including a lecture video and a link to an article that will help you to kind of get an idea of this topic. I think it's always nice to expand on what we're talking about. So you'll find it there to kind of assist you with getting started with this one. But when we're looking at the food for thought assignment, I'm asking you to write a short paragraph, and really the length is kind of up to you, how long you feel that you need for covering all that material. But that is something that I'm looking for. For some students, it's a couple of sentences. For some students, it's a couple of paragraphs. But what I'm looking for is common misconceptions of what this term refers to, being double jointed, and then also addressing what is the more accurate definition. I'm also looking for anatomical characteristics that are involved in being double jointed, and maybe a brief rationale about some of the reasons why being double jointed is not just a cool party trick. So students really do often a good job on this, but remember, this is word of 8 points, so I need probably more than just one sentence. If you provide me a very, very short answer, it might be hard to hit all of the learning points that I'm looking for just through that. So that might be something to kind of keep on mind as you're tackling this assignment. I think that's all that I can think of to say of that. Let me just stop sharing a screen for a second because I want to show you something else as well. I want to show you that if I were a student approaching this question, what would be some of the things that I would focus on? And what I think will help you, hold on a second. is really to answer to all of those things that I mentioned, that I'm looking for the full discussion of those questions that I listed. The questions should really guide you as you're tackling the material for this assignment. I do also want to mention quickly our quiz and practice anatomy. So let's get that as well on our screen. Give me a second to find the right view to share with you. So the quiz and practice anatomy follow very similar structure than what you've done before. Let's have a look of an example of what we've got going on there in the chapter 9 quiz. And again, you'll see that it's a quiz where we have 12 questions. Here's a good example of a typical question that could come up. How are individual joints typically named? We often name joints based on the names of the bones that are involved in that joint. So that would really be, out of these options that I'm providing, the only option that kind of makes sense in terms of the options available for you. Let's have a look at the next question. Next question asks us, an articulation or a joint is defined as what, and then you choose the best option. In this case, articulations are points where two bones meet. So that's what we're looking at that question. Then we have again these familiar drag and drop questions where we're looking at classifying joints to different categories. So we're seeing synovial joints listed. They could be plain, hinge, pivot, condylar, saddle, cartilaginous joints, chondrosis, symphysis, fibrous ones, comphysis, sutures, and syndesmosis. So again, you work through these to kind of gain an idea of how to answer to these questions, an idea of what are the key points of the chapter. Here again, we're seeing a complete sentence. You actually type in the answer yourself. So synthetic fibrous joints between the bones of the skull are called our sutures. So I think that that gives you a good idea of what to expect in terms of the quiz. We're going to also have a look of the chapter 9 practice anatomy, so you have an idea what to expect there as well. Let me share my screen. And here we're labeling different components of these cartilaginous joints that we're seeing here. So for example, we're seeing this junction between your sternum, the chest bone, and the clavicle coming together. So we're seeing sternum here nicely as the breastbone being the layman's language name for this structure. And we're seeing our clavicle. I think the common word that we use for that is that we often describe that as our collarbone. We're also seeing our first rib here, which attaches the sternum directly to the directly underneath the clavicle, and we're seeing also our costal cartilage, which was important for attaching the ribs to the sternum. So a really nice joint here. We're seeing another kind of a joint here within the vertebral column, and we're seeing that the intervertebral discs are found there, these pieces of fiber cartilage between the individual vertebrae. So that's kind of a nice one there. I also mentioned during the kind of brief review of the lecture material the pubic symphysis. So we're seeing these cartilaginous joints here between the pubic bones. So kind of a nice one as well. Um, so really the practice anatomies are more visual based activities. Here we're identifying the parts of the synovial joint. We're seeing the proximal phalanx uh, in the finger bones. We're seeing the periosteum, uh, outer covering of a bone. We're seeing the bone itself, a connective tissue type. We're seeing the middle phalanx, and we're seeing what we discussed just before, the articular cartilages at the ends of these bones, the tissue covering the ends of the bones in many synovial joints. There are a few other words, but they haven't been labeled in this particular diagram. So there are going to be other diagrams where you get to label those parts as well. So we're seeing the ligament, tissue used to attach one bone to another. So you're seeing the bones attached with this ligament. We're also seeing the joint cavity, the space between the bones of the joint, and we see how it contains the synovial fluid. What else can we see? We can see the fibrous capsule running as a continuous with the periosteum and synovial membrane, the layer that secretes actually synovial fluid, forming the joint capsule. We saw those in our previous review as well, as you remember from this diagram that we did together. Let's have a look. What else can we see? We can see another type of an activity, a drop and drag and drop. We're describing different synovial joint types. So ball and socket joint is a multi-axial joint. Saddle joint is a biaxial joint, where both bones are concave in one direction and they kind of convex in other. So it forms this saddle-like joint. A plane joint, where the adjacent bones slide over another and have relatively limited mobility. Condylar joint was a biaxial joint extending in an oval convex surface on one bone that fits into concave depression of another one. Hinge one, a monoaxial joint. So I think that the hinges of the door are a good example of that, moving freely only in one plane. And pivot joints are monoaxial joints in which a bone spins on its longitudinal axis. So we're seeing that as well. So really, lots of visual based questions in our practice anatomy. We're getting to visit some of the movements that we've talked about before, because the movements are really what we're seeing as a result of these joints that we've talked about. Remember, flexion was always when we reduced an angle between two parts. Hyperextension, so you could do an extension as well, where you're actually adding to the angle of the joint, but you could go beyond that as well and do something that we call hyperextension, going beyond that. You can do flexion also in a lateral plane if you wish. We're seeing that there to the side direction. We see rotation, where we're turning to the left or right of the body position. That's a good example. We can see it at different body parts as well. So I think that that puts us to a fairly good place in terms of reviewing what could come up in the quizzes and so on. So let me just finish off by sharing my presentation once more and the last time. Like I've said before, I am here to help you, so don't hesitate to message me. Even though I do have a fairly busy schedule also with in-person classes, other classes, I will make the time to meet with you. I hope that this course is low stress but rewarding for you. So again, that survey, if you complete that, that would be a great help for me. I would really appreciate it. And like I said, do remember that it goes also to my supervisors. On that note, I think that this is a good time for us to wrap up our session today. I appreciate you joining me. And like I said, I'll be uploading these drawings that we did together also to your Canvas course. I hope it's a really good week for you. I really, really do appreciate each and every one of you for being part of this course. And at this point, we're midpoint of the semester, so you're doing incredibly well. We are getting there with the progress, and soon enough, you'll find out that we have reached our finish line. So again, thank you for your company this week. I look forward seeing more great work and being able to provide more individualized feedback on those food for thought questions. And I wish you a very good rest of the week. Thank you again. Bye.